Good evening, and welcome back to ParaGhoul Paranormal Discoveries from the Dark, the radio show where we dive into the shadows of Saskatchewan, and sometimes even across Canada, to see what lies within. I'm your host, KD Kulpa, and I'm a horror author and paranormal researcher based here in Regina. Joining us today is Josh from You Say Whoa on TikTok. Now, Josh and I have met and talked paranormal stories before because of his SKary Saskatchewan series on TikTok, but he's also been involved in many paranormal investigations within Saskatchewan over the past years. So we're going to talk about that today. Now, like I said, Josh and I have chatted before, both on his podcast, and I interviewed him actually a couple of years ago on my YouTube channel. So I'm sure we're going to need another two-part interview series here. I've already slotted Josh to come back next week's episode as well. But let's dive into it today and just see what we get into. So welcome, Josh, to the podcast, and thank you for being here today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so how are you? What's new?
I'm doing well. I Not a whole lot is new for me. I've kind of taken a little bit of a break from TikTok for a while, mainly because I have lots of ideas, but my son is playing sports for the first time. So
Oh, yeah.
he played hockey and now lacrosse, and so
Oh
a
my
lot
God.
of my spare time is shuttling him around from practice to games and everything in between. So
I know the feeling. Yeah.
yeah. Keeps me busy, that's for sure.
Oh, they definitely do, don't they? Oh, that's pretty
Yes.
funny. Yeah, so I guess can you start by telling us a bit about yourself and like how you got into paranormal stuff?
Yeah, so for me, my interest in the paranormal goes back to being a wee lad, a young child. And I grew up in a house where we had lots of cousins visiting quite regularly. And a lot of those cousins, I think looking back now, probably had like overactive imaginations. And every little activity that would happen in our house that they could not explain, whether it was a weird bang or a creak in the walls or whatever, it had to have been a ghost or something worse. Um, and so growing up in that environment, it really kind of piqued my interest. We would watch lots of scary movies and everything like that. And then going forward as an adult, it was an interest that never really left me. And I remember even just like being a teenager and my best friend when I was a kid, his name was Chad. We would often hang out at his house on Saturday nights because there was a block of programming on YTV called The Dark Corner, and it was all of these shows like that talked about ghosts and different things like that. So we would watch these shows, and then we decided that we would try and do our own little ghost hunts and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And it would be simple things like we would set up the camcorder in the corner of the bedroom when, because I lived at his house when I was younger too. Like I was there so frequently that when his sister moved out, his parents said, "Hey, you have your own bedroom now." and and so oftentimes at sleepovers, we would, like I said, set up the camera in the corner of the room and let it record while we would sleep because there were stories that his sister had about their house as well. And uh, we caught some strange things on video, but it could have just been reflection. Like there was an aquarium in one corner and the TV was on the other side and the camera was facing the aquarium and we could see these reflections, and at one point, it looked like there was like legs that kind of passed in front of the camera and blocked
Ooh.
out the reflection of the TV on the aquarium. Um, was it paranormal? I don't know. Could it have been just something on the television that, looked like
Looked kind of weird.
legs passing by? Very possible, right? So, um, yeah. And then going into uh, a period in time where I was fortunate enough to participate in, I don't know, half a dozen to a dozen paranormal investigations at a major network of museums here in the province of Saskatchewan. So, yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and again, it really is just an interest that arose from stories as a kid, and an interest that continues because I love to hear stories, and there are so many great ghost stories out there.
Oh, I find that too. And I find as soon as you tell people that have an interest in hearing ghost stories, that everyone seems to have a story.
It really is true. It's one of those things where um, people that you don't expect to have an interest in the paranormal, maybe not even an interest, but just an experience or a story. And then you mention it. And it happened just recently where there was a parent on my son's lacrosse team. We were talking at lunch, and I had mentioned something about ghost stories. We were in Weyburn, which is a place where I have done some investigations. And I had kind of mentioned that. And then he told me this great story about his grandparents' house, and some experiences that he had there. And I would not have expected somebody like him to be somebody who's had an experience, but it just goes to show that you never know where you're going to get a story.
Oh, that's very true. Yeah. It's always interesting. Yeah, Weyburn. I still haven't gone to Weyburn. I gotta get there one of these days. I think that'd be an interesting spot.
Yeah, it's I've only been there a handful of times, both for lacrosse. My son's lacrosse team plays there regularly, and then two paranormal investigations, which um, led to some interesting results. Again, I don't know how much of it was actually paranormal, but just a quick story about the one investigation that we went on. Part of it, I think, the folks that I was investigating with, they have a YouTube channel and they create their own content, and they invited me to come out and participate. So I went out, and they really built it up to be this, like, I was expecting, to go into a place like the Winchester Mystery Mansion where there's like tons
Oh,
of stories, right? Like I
yeah.
was expecting nonstop activity, and then it was pretty quiet. Not a lot happened. And the one weird thing though that happened was at one point, so it was at the Tommy Douglas Performing Arts Centers where we had conducted this
Okay.
investigation. And the history of that building, it was a church that was located in downtown Weyburn that had been relocated in the 80s or 90s to Signal Hill, which is apparently another part of the city that has a storied history around paranormal activity. And the church is famous because it was, to the best of my knowledge, the only church where Tommy Douglas, former Premier of Saskatchewan, actually served as minister before venturing off into politics.
Okay.
And so the church is now converted into a performing arts center. There's a small Tommy Douglas museum associated or attached to the building, and then there is a basement. And at one point during the investigation, where I'm sitting on the main floor, which still very much looks like a church, the stage obviously looks very different. It's not like a church. It's now a stage, and I'm sitting in one of the pews, and one of the other investigators is sitting in another set of pews. And one of the stories that we're hearing about these spirits in the building is that they like to whistle. And so I'm sitting in the pew. This guy is sitting, I don't know, 10 feet away from me. And then there's a third investigator, but he's in the basement and he's doing a spirit box session. And so we could hear everything that was happening. And I just decided I would sit there and I was going to whistle. All of a sudden, we heard a whistle come back, and it was like the exact same length, the exact same tone as what I whistled. And I heard it, but I didn't react right away. But the guy who was with me, he's like, "Was that you again?" And I said, "No, I only whistled once."
Yeah.
And so he heard it and I heard it. And he's like, "Well, it wasn't me because I can't even whistle." And so that was the one strange occurrence that we had that night. And I uh, kicked myself because we were kind of in a moment of downtime and I wasn't recording at the
Oh
time.
no. Oh darn, hey.
So I missed it. And but it's still a neat story to come out of there. And I mean, there's, tons of other stories around people experiencing, strange sounds. feet coming up and down or stomping up and down stairs in the back of the building, and things of that nature, and that wasn't my experience there. um I also sometimes feel like now, too, being a little bit older and having done more of these investigations, I think I'm a bit more skeptical
Oh, yeah.
um, as well. And so I do try to find those, logical explanations for what we're hearing. And I think that kind of conflicted a little bit with the investigators that I was working with, because they really, I think well, I know they fed off of each other. And
Yeah.
so for them, like one would hear something and the other one would kind of corroborate what they were hearing. And then there was me, it's like, well, I don't know. Are you sure that's what it was? Because to me, it sounded like the heating system kicked in. um,
Yeah.
and so that was, maybe that's why I didn't have the experience, because I was closed off a little bit more that night. I don't know, but still a cool experience nonetheless.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's what I find. I always, when people, people tell me about watching these paranormal investigation shows and YouTubes, and I'm probably unpopular for saying, I don't believe like 80% of the stuff that they talk about, because I'm like, really, they're just feeding off each other, and you got to make it exciting, right? Because
Mhm.
otherwise it's boring, which is probably why I don't know that I'd ever do paranormal investigation as a YouTube show, because I feel like then you're just looking for something and it's not necessarily a paranormal experience.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
to me, what's interesting is having been on, I'm by no means a professional, and maybe you can't even call somebody a professional in the world of paranormal. I don't know, but um, uh, my experiences have found, so I've never seen anything on any paranormal investigation. I've had several experiences where I've heard things
Yeah.
that I cannot explain. And many situations where there are things that have happened that it's like, oh, we've been able to recreate that sound. So it's probably, something maybe fell and, caused that sound, and whatever the case may be. But I found most often when we were having these experiences, when we were actually sitting there actively trying to solicit or elicit a response, nothing would happen.
Yeah.
But the second we would stop and we would just start talking amongst ourselves, that's when things would start happening and these sounds would start occurring. Situations like that happened countless times. And I don't know why that is. If the spirits are able to, um, I guess, tune into what we're doing as well.
Yeah.
Maybe it's their way of saying, hey, you know what? I'm not going to respond because you're trying to find me, but I'll play a trick on you when you're not expecting it. Right? I don't know how it works, but
Yeah.
that is a strange thing that I can't quite explain why it happens, or at least in my experience, it happened that way.
Yeah. Well, not, I think and that's what I find too, is a lot of the times, you purposely go to a place because I like going to paranormal locations just to see if anything happens.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't go there expecting anything to happen because I find that's when nothing happens. You get there and it's like, well, this is really quiet and enjoyable time. And sometimes I also find when talking to people about their experiences, like the paranormal activity they've experienced doesn't happen at 2 a.m. It happens 10 a.m. or it happens at 2 p.m. Like it can happen anytime.
Yes, absolutely, and that's something that I uh, have been wondering, because a lot of people will talk about, oh well, the prime time or the witching hour is 3 a.m. and so and then people say, well, time is a man-made construct, and so it's like all of these things happen all over the world, and it's like, how do the spirits know that it's like 3 a.m. in
3 a.m. at
Egypt,
that
or
location.
yeah, or 3 a.m. in Vancouver, right? Like,
Yeah.
how does that, and that's the part that always confuses me, because a lot of these investigation shows do happen in the middle of the night, and
Yeah.
it's like, well, what happens if we went in at noon and tried to do it? Would we still get responses, or does it have to be dark and spooky? And do we get bonus points if there's thunder and lightning in the background?
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, and I mean, obviously there are a lot of people who find a big interest in doing stuff like that, and there certainly is a rush to it. Like
Yeah.
it is. I had so much fun doing the investigations because I got to meet some very fun people. I got to have some very spooky experiences. But yeah, there is so much downtime, and it is often very boring too. Like if you can sit there in a location for 10 hours and maybe have activity for 15 minutes. And then, there might be things, depending on what kind of equipment you're using, where you can go and you have to review all of the evidence.
Yeah.
And so if you have four cameras recording and three audio recorders recording, and then you have handheld cameras that you're using as well, that could be 10 devices that you're having to review, and that obviously takes a lot of time. And you may pick up some stuff, but you may not. And so certainly if people want to try it, I would, obviously do it safely. Make sure you have permission to enter any locations that you want to investigate, but be prepared for lots of quiet time and downtime, and it's like watching paint dry.
Yeah, it kind of is sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I find them funny. And yeah, even like well, like at the government house when we were there just doing a tour, we weren't even trying to get anything. And we had a weird knock on the camera, like happen right behind my husband who was filming. And when he was by himself, he was just taking B-roll. He wasn't even like
Hmm.
trying to get anything. And we
Yeah.
had a weird knock right behind him. So it was like, so yeah, I love doing them. Um, but not to show things. It's more just to go sit there and like you said, you're typically sitting there quietly
Yep.
waiting for something to happen, and it doesn't always happen, which is why I always struggle watching those shows. I find them just fantastic for entertainment more than anything. I don't.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. I have had the opportunity to be on set, I guess, as they would say, for two episodes of The Other Side, which is a paranormal investigation
Oh,
show filmed. Well, I think it's filmed all over Canada now, but certainly their first season was filmed throughout Saskatchewan. And there were two episodes that featured the Western Development Museum, and that's where I worked at the time. And I was featured in the episode, and we filmed combined two episodes, 6 days of filming, um, and lots of downtime. And they like each day was three, or sorry, each shoot was 3 days long, and they trim that down into 22 minutes. And there is so much content that people do not get to see. Like, because we had some pretty cool things happening in the building. Um, but there's a lot that people didn't get to see because it's cut down to 22 minutes too. So I often wonder, on the other side, it's great for entertainment. There's lots of downtime. There's lots of, um, you know, excitement that they, whether it's a 60-minute show or a 30-minute show, and then of course you have to factor in the time for commercials. But so you're looking at what, 22 to 44 minutes depending on the show, and I often wonder, like, what hits the cutting room floor that we don't actually get to see too, right? Like
that's
there's
true.
probably, if they could do a director's cut, and or even if it was just like upload things to YouTube so people can go in and check it out, I think there would be lots of cool content that we don't get to, we don't get a chance to see either.
Yeah, well, that's very true. Yeah. Well, yeah, especially when you have, I forget what the show is called. They used to stay in, was it like 3 nights or 3 days? And they would just film the entire time they were there.
Yeah, I can't remember what that show's called, but there was also that one on Netflix. Was it 28 Days Haunted or something?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. Yeah.
Yeah, where they like visited multiple locations, and they each had a team of two, I think,
Something like that, yeah.
in three different locations for 28 days. Like the amount
A
of
lot of
content,
content.
yeah, to review that. And yeah, it would, I often wonder, do they actually review every single, piece of footage, because
That's true. Yeah.
that would take a very long time unless you have a very large team.
Yeah. Or if they just key in on the points that the people that are in the show say, "Oh, well, something happened here," but like, what if a camera picked up something in a different room that nobody knows?
Yeah, exactly, right.
Yes.
And yeah, that's the great unknown. Who really knows for sure what's happening? It's like the old, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? I don't know
Yeah.
even know if I got that right, but it's that kind of idea. And I know, like, the investigations that I've participated in, we had a team of individuals who would actually go through and review footage from every device that they had. And so we would do the investigation, and then, it would be 2 or 3 weeks before we actually would hear from them what evidence they had captured. And these are folks who they weren't in it for money. Like, they never charged for these investigations. They all had, full-time day jobs, and so they were balancing their passion for paranormal investigations with their lives.
Live. Yeah.
And so they would, like I said, review every piece of footage from all audio recorders, and they would have, anywhere from 4 to 6, maybe even more stationary cameras recording. They would have all of the handheld cameras that would record some video, some would just be still photos. And they would review it all. And sometimes they would come back. We did one investigation where there was absolutely nothing captured. And it wasn't
Oh
like
no.
no strange banging sounds from just the building heating up or cooling down or anything, right? Like, it was just, there was nothing that they could identify as any sort of anomaly. Um, Whereas other situations, they would come back and there would be, they would have maybe 20 pieces of evidence to share with us. And it could be something as strange as, or as simple rather, as, here's a weird knocking sound. And we listened to, 15, 20 minutes of footage just to see, like, oh, is it cyclical? Is there, like, can we explain? Does it seem like it's a pattern? But nothing, right? So here's just a strange thing that's occurred. To Here's a weird shape on this camera. It looks like it could be a bug flying in front of the infrared light, but
Oh,
it doesn't follow like the typical flight path that you might see from an insect flying in front of this. And so they were fairly thorough in what they would review and bring forward
yeah.
as evidence. But yeah, there was still sometimes it's like, well, I don't know. You claim to hear one thing, I'm hearing another thing, and I guess that's part of it too, right? Is it's
Yeah.
all kind of like subjective to what one person hears and identifies that sound as.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It would be a big perspective. Each person would have their own perspective of what not only the experience or what they hear, but yeah, just what it is too. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Huh?
it's a fun world, and like I said, if I do encourage folks to, if you want to try it, to do so, but obviously be respectful. I mean, I talked about being a bit more skeptical in my old age, but it's I like I said, I have also had experiences that I just can't figure out or explain, and so if there are spirits out there, I mean, you want to be respectful to them as well, right?
Oh,
Like,
definitely. Yeah.
you are venturing into their space, and maybe it's uninvited because you don't hear the spirit say, "Hey, come on in and take a seat."
Exactly. Yeah.
So yes, be respectful of the space that you're in, of the folks that you're with, of the community that you're in as well, because I know there are some folks who may not completely agree with venturing into the world of paranormal activity. So you might get some uh, comments from people who live next door to wherever you are, whatever the case may be. Yeah, just be respectful through it all, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
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 And the other, like when it comes to paranormal stuff, that I also find to be an interesting turn of events now too, is just seeing like, because we're in a world of content generation where anybody with a phone can create stuff. You see so many cool things that are out there now, and some people are pretty creative, and the skill sets are quite high for a lot of people too. So you never know what's real and what isn't, right?
Oh,
And
exactly. Yeah.
lots of faked content out there for sure.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and yeah, and even with like the Hollywood shows, maybe they don't necessarily fake it, but they definitely hype up what could be, like you said, a furnace kicking in, or what could be, like they hype it up and make it exciting when realistically
Yes, yes. I
doesn't mean
think
anything.
I know.
And just as I guessed, we're actually out of time, and I feel like we have so much more to talk about. So sorry, Josh, for having to cut you off there. But tune in next week, listeners, as we will continue our conversation. There's been a lot of talk about different paranormal investigations, and we haven't been able to get into all of the ghost stories yet, so we will try to do that next week. Thank you for joining us tonight. Don't forget, if you'd like to support the show, you can find me on most social media platforms under KDKULPA. I also have a Patreon for those that want behind-the-scenes information, extra content, and a chance to join a live Q&A with me each month. So stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, where we'll uncover more secrets, unravel more mysteries, and delve deeper into the shadows. Until then, remember to keep your flashlight handy and digital recorders ready. This is KD Kulpa signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.